Well, welcome back for our third episode of Min Ed Soda. I am the Duffer Kipling. Today I am joined by my colleague and friend, the Dr. Todd Van Erp. Todd, welcome back for another episode, number 3. We haven't
Hey,
struck out yet.
well, I don't know. This is the third one, so maybe if we do whiff with some people, though, maybe we'll get a few fall tips, and we can keep getting in people's ears.
Well, we got a little help today because it's not just about us anymore. We've brought the bringer of the juice and the excitement for alternative learning, Nick Clasemann from WIllmar Area ALC. So this should be fun, Todd, because we can just kind of sit back and listen.
Yeah, and like I was saying last week, Kip, he brings a lot of energy every time we talk. So we we can just jump right into this. And Nick, welcome. Thanks for agreeing to join us today. And here's the big question that all of our listeners have been wondering, and even Kip and I have been wondering this too. The first question is, how do you pronounce your last name?
Yes, you pronounce it Clasemann. I always say
Claus.
it's like Santa Claus men, Clasemann. That's how I had to teach the students back in the day.
Nice. So, okay, well, I guess you can hit end, Kip. The interview's over.
That's all we needed to
I'm
know.
kidding. No. Hey, we're super thrilled that you're with us today, Nick. Thank you so much. And I guess the first question as we get into our conversation with you is, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to your current position in WIllmar.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. Really excited for this opportunity to get to kind of, share about the cool things that are going on in WIllmar. This is my 11th year in education. I spent the first 9 in the traditionals at an elementary level and middle school level. And then I was blessed with the opportunity by our superintendent and the committee that decided they wanted to jump off the cliff with me. They allowed me to be principal of alternative programs for WIllmar Public Schools. So I oversee our high school, our 912 ALC, the middle school ALC. I also have a detention center, Prairie Lakes Education Center, Lake Park School under my belt. And then we have Lakeview, which is a mental health facility for adolescents. And then we have Greater Minnesota Education Center. And then, of course, with ALCs, we have targeted services and summer schools. So just a couple of things to stay busy with. But I can tell you, I am super fired up. This is my second year, feels like year 5 with COVID. But I'm super fired up about the great things that we have going on. I have some very dynamic staff at my ALC and at the detention center. We provide education, and I'm super jazzed up. And I never thought I'd end up in the alternatives, but I'm super glad that I stumbled upon it and that I get to live in this world of doing everything we possibly can for each individual student where they need to be met.
Yeah, and I have the luxury of, I get to work with Nick on a fairly regular basis, not only in one-to-one, but we've got a cohort down here in Southwest Minnesota of just ALC leaders. And it is awesome to hear all the great things that not only Nick has going on, but the rest of that cohort have in terms of really trying to put the alternative back into alternative learning center. We're dealing with students who often in society, we are referring, these students are referred to as students that have failed, instead of us looking as a system and saying, as a system, we have failed these students. And that is one of the things I greatly appreciate about Nick, is how often he's trying to meet the students where they're at and then make it so they can be successful. So Nick, if you could share some of the things that you're doing at WIllmar ALC to meet the students where they're at and give them the best opportunity to graduate on time, or at least as close to on time as they can, ready to make the choice of what they would like to do with the rest of their life, whether that's join the workforce or head off for some kind of post-secondary education.
Absolutely. And I think this is what we pride ourselves in at our ALC is anytime we have a new student come in, we try to give them the benefit of the doubt. We're looking for every possible nook and cranny where they might have partial credits that we can honor. And a lot of times with traditional settings, sometimes they don't get honored for partial credit. They may have been in a class for half of a quarter and they come out with a 0% F because they didn't show up enough and they didn't get honored for that work. So our teachers are looking not only at grade books to honor that work, but they're also looking for ways to pre-assess students. A lot of times we have students that come into our building and say, I already did this. Like I can explain this to you. Just give me an opportunity. And we're at the point with our staff now, they say, awesome. Here's a quick little quiz. Talk me through it. Walk me through it. Work the problem out on a piece of paper. I don't care how you go about it. Let me know that you understand this. Perfect example. We had a student join us from our high school here. And he said, I already know all of this stuff in these first 4 chapters. And my math teacher said, that's awesome. I don't have any evidence. Can you prove it to me? And the kid said, I don't want to work it out on paper. And my math teacher said, cool. Will you explain it to me? If I just show you a problem, can you work it out? Can you explain it? And over the course of 2 days of class, he worked through 4 chapters and showed that he already had that mastery. So that was a check, check, check. Those standards are covered. And I think that's the key. At the very, very onset of a student enrolling is we're looking at what are the standards they have to know for that class. So if that kid has those first 4 chapters that are aligned to the Minnesota State standards for, in this case, geometry, we're checking those boxes off and we're starting them right where they haven't done any of the learning yet, or they don't have a mastery level or a proficiency level that we believe is going to help them move forward. So then we have them start working through that, through those assignments.
So quick question for you, Nick. Did your staff need special training on pre-assessments? Did they need some training on around standards? How did you get your, or is it a mindset with your teachers? Like, how did you get them to this point where they're willing to take in a student like that, go through some type of pre-assessment, and then, you know, be able to determine where the student should start with in your program?
So I think the answer to that is yes, yes, and yes. One of the biggest things is if you haven't been in an alternative and you're coming from traditional, you have to kind of break down the barrier of what you believe school is supposed to be. And this understanding that you have to have X amount of hours. You know, a lot of times there's this idea you have to have 60 hours in order to earn a credit. And in some alternatives, they're literally looking for 60 hours of a butt in a seat to honor that credit. And we're saying, no, 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 no. Sally Reynolds has been incredible, and Mary Berry, they keep telling us standard mastery, that is what earns a credit. And so we had to shift our mindset and say, we are not traditional, we are alternative, and we are just going to look at our standards. But I have an incredible instructional coach, Amy Paul, and she helped us to frame how we were going to start looking at, as we were diving into creating what we're calling our playbooks, which is essentially how students can navigate through, and we're calling it the middle of the road pathway to earn a credit based off of standards. And so what we did is we started working through on what did we believe the priority standards should be? What are they going to see if they go into, you know, a post-secondary schooling? What types of standards are going to help them there? If they are going to go into the workforce, what kind of standards might support them along that pathway? What do we believe as a staff, what standards are the most relevant for those students? So we had a 5-step process that they went through as they were sifting out the standards, and that's how they were able to determine that. Now, through our playbook work, and what was super exciting is last Friday, ironically, we went through our first self-reflection and peer review of a playbook that we had created. And so all my staff presented to 2 different groups, and they shared out their playbook. What had they developed for students? Was it accessible to students? Could a student come in and with a little bit of a startup energy, could they figure out how to navigate through? Of course, we know the teacher's voice is still going to be there supporting the learning, but could they be more individualized or more independent if they needed to be? And it was really fun to see how many staff members were more confident in their understanding of their standards because they had to dive into it to figure out what assignment could go along with that, or what were the different, we keep talking about the learning outcomes based off the standards. What transportation mode are you going to take to get there? Are we going to do a presentation? Are we going to do an essay? It's just, the staff have really opened their eyes.
A couple of things I want to dig a little bit deeper into and also give a little explanation. Early on, you said something, you referred to Mary Berry and Sally Reynolds. For those of you that are not familiar, those are some of our leaders at the Minnesota Department of Education in the areas of alternative learning
Yep.
centers. And so when he's saying that, that is giving us and clarity around some of our statutes. And then two, I wonder if you could dig a little bit deeper, because you really touched on, we are marking the students for what they have learned, right? Like it's not about seat time, it's not about grading in terms of how we typically grade. It's like a set of proficiencies that you need to achieve to get our class. And so go a little bit deeper with that, but then also deeper with, and a little bit more explanation with, you talked about playbooks. You said it at least two, if not three times. And I have an idea of what they are, but if you could go a little bit deeper in those.
Absolutely. So we, let's call a spade here, you guys. So we're hoping that we're going to be moving to proficiency scales in the not so distant future. Actually, we're hoping it's going to be potentially a district-wide decision. Shh, don't tell anybody. We will see how that progresses, but I feel like my staff is really poised for that kind of a, they're poised for that next step. Because right now, so we don't have our proficiency scales yet. That's the key right there, is yet. But what we have is we have learning outcomes that are directly tied to the standards and benchmarks. Now, those outcomes are the non-negotiables. Those are the things that the students, when they come into the classroom, they have to learn. So if we take two steps back, we're creating playbooks. So playbooks essentially are, if a student comes to us and they need, let's say they need their geometry first and second credits. In our district, we have 2 credits per year. The teacher that developed that playbook started by looking at his standards and his benchmarks and determined the specific outcomes that the students needed to have in order to earn each of those respective credits. From there, he developed I can statements that the students would be able to reference, and he would reference with the students to monitor their level of understanding and to see if they were having common conversations and using common vocabulary terms as they're going through the process. Now, ultimately, what resulted from that is, once you know what the outcome is and you know it's tied to the standard and these are the I cans, now the teachers can be creative with every student that walks through the door, and they can figure out a different way for the student to get to that outcome. So again, if we have a student that doesn't like to do paper pencil, but might like to be more of an oral type learner and can do a podcast or a video explanation, or just wants to record themselves, I don't know, doing a Zoom conference meeting or something. We have a lot of very unique students that like to do unique things. They can show us their understanding based off that outcome if they wanted to do it in that way, or if they wanted to write an essay and get to the outcome. The playbooks were developed in respect to a common pathway, but then teachers are now throwing in the alternative pathways. And like I said, that's been essential for our students because they know where they need to head with their learning, but it helps our teachers to understand better, because we had some gaps between our expectation and then what the assignments actually were that they were doing. We knew the standards that the students needed to accomplish, and we knew the assignments, but there was a disconnect between the two and the ownership of those between the students and the staff members. And so we've really tried to pare everything down and say, teachers, what do they actually need to learn? Now, don't make them read that novel to get to that learning if they don't have the time to do that. Find a short excerpt that's still a complex text that can also get them to that outcome. So it's been a journey and it's been a process, and it's taken us until this point in the year to have one playbook developed, and it will continue to develop as we introduce it to students and we fine tune and figure out, is this really working? Or if we need to make adjustments along the way. So more work to come on those.
Oh, and at the beginning, you shared that this was a little bit of a secret. It was going to get bigger district wide. Don't worry, your secret is safe on our podcast because we have like 5 listeners.
For now.
Yeah, that's what I keep saying, Nick. So what, tell me about some other things that you have going on with your staff right now. This is, I'm sure this has taken up a lot of time and effort, just getting your staff to become familiar with standards, kind of changing the way of thinking of how credits are earned. What are some other things that you have going on at the schools right now that you want to talk about?
Well, I think one of the really cool things, and this again, Friday was such an encouraging day because we had multiple content area teachers in one room sharing what their playbook looked like. And it was incredible how many teachers said, wait a minute, you have students writing a paper about finances in one of their classes. Well, why don't you share that with the social teacher that's going to be teaching that student economics? And why don't we actually let that student double up on that one assignment? And all of a sudden, this cross-curricular conversation started happening, and more our staff are trying to scan what they're doing and get out of just watching their lane of, if I'm doing English, they're going to read a book and they're going to be writing about whatever it was that they read, whether it was a character development, a plot development. And what my social teacher and my science teacher are saying is, hey, can we broaden our view? If I have a student doing a research paper and I have them diving into a specific scientist, could I have them write about that, ensure that they understand what it was that they did for science, but then provide that to you and be able to honor any kind of the writing process? If we work together, and all of a sudden these students are writing one paper, which is taking them anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to write, depending upon the student, but now they're being honored in both of those classes, which is helping them to continue making positive progress towards getting those credits completed, not only in science, but also in English. And so we're having more of those conversations, which has been super exciting, because for a long time, we were just trying to live in our silos. But that's because that's what traditional taught us, is that everybody just teaches their content and only their content. And you'll get lucky if you have that one big, everybody's gonna, I think about Des Cocato. We had our big Holocaust unit that we did in 8th grade, and everything connected to it. But it was the most powerful learning because it was cross-curricular. It was the one time that we pulled ourselves back from being so focused here. So finally, our teachers are seeing that we are a whole system and we share all these students. So why not capitalize on that and honor the work that they're doing in more than one way? But our teachers too are, I apologize, Skip, I just want to share, I had a social/math teacher this morning that said, hey, I have this student that's making kind of slow progress in world geography, but she wrote me this paper about tarantulas and where tarantulas come from after her tarantula passed away, sadly. And she said, I want to honor it, but I can't give it for World Geo right now because it wasn't quite there, but I could give it to her for a social elective. And all of a sudden, she's already looking ahead to the next credit that student needs to earn. And she wants to log that instead of saying, nope, sorry, we can't do that. But that's the other cool thing about our schedule, is you're in social studies and you're working on social studies in some manner. We're just being focused, individualized on what you need to get done.
Two things that I would like to know even a little bit more, hear more about as you talk about these. There's two things that have to occur for for your staff to be this flexible. Actually, it's many things, but for your staff to have the permission to do this is, one, is your communication chain with your local high school, and the communication and the partnership that has to happen to make sure that when they come, that you're able to get a good understanding of where the students are at and what they've already been able to demonstrate. And then two, the second piece is, because you're not talking about hours, right? It's not 22 hours or 60 hours or whatever it needs for a credit. You have to be able to keep your grade book open, and that your grade book doesn't close, and that students can come back in and out. And so can you tell a little bit more about both that relationship you've got going on with your high school, and two, how you've been able to um, figuratively leave your grade book open for a student so it never closes on them?
Absolutely. So our biggest thing is we've been working really hard with our local high school, and surrounding high schools as well. I'd be lying if I said we weren't. But when we have a student that comes to us, we have a pretty intimate. We have a meeting with not only the counselors out at the high school. We have a meeting with the student, with the parents, and then with my program coordinator, Betty Dawson, who's absolutely incredible at what she does. But we get down to the nitty gritty and we figure out exactly what that student needs credit wise, and where they are behind or where their opportunities for growth are at. And when that student is determined to be coming to our building, Betty actually goes into our common Infinite Campus, or SIS, and she prints off every grade book from the high school, because we actually get access to the grade books, and she can print those off, and we get to see exactly what it was that the student passed in the class and what it was that they had failed according to that teacher, or fallen short on if it wasn't at a passing score. The beautiful thing is that my staff have started diving into those, and we get to honor that work, because they actually look for, if a student failed tests, but they were passing the daily work, they're looking for testing anxiety or some sort of a disconnect for that student between their daily work and their actual assessments, if that's where that misfire was at. Or they look and they say, wow, this kid did absolutely incredible on their assessments, but they did terrible on their daily work and they never turned anything in, but they passed with the 57%. Again, we're looking at that student and they didn't turn work in. And so they're failing because of that, not because they didn't understand the learning. So we're looking at, was it a work completion issue / attendance issue? Or was it actually, I know my standards and I'm being honored for that? Because if we see a discrepancy there, then our staff says, you know what, I have 2 things I need the student to do for me real quick, just so I can do a quick check on their learning. And if they pass those, done. We're riding off into the sunset, we're writing that credit, because it doesn't seem like that's the issue. But again, if we ever have any questions, what's been beautiful, when the high school, when we were in distance learning, they had pared back some of their assignments in some of the math classes, and that never got communicated over. Well, our staff caught on to that there was a discrepancy. They got on the phone with the math teachers out at the high school and said, hey, just curious, I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent. I just need clarification so I can fully support this student in the credit recovery. And very quickly, we realized they cut out 3 of the sections from one of the chapters, and that's why they didn't see it on the grade book. So we didn't have to do that part of the credit recovery, since that was never introduced to the student. So that's incredible. The other piece is we have bi-weekly meetings with the counselors out at the high school, because they're the ones that end up referring students over to the ALC, or they're oftentimes the ones that are initiating that conversation or fielding those questions from students if they're inquiring about coming to the ALC. So my program coordinator, my counselor, and then the 3 counselors, the principal out at the high school, and then myself, we all sit down bi-weekly and have conversations, which has been incredible. So that's the communication component of it is absolutely essential. The other piece, Kip, that you were asking about is our grading window. We literally are term 1 all year long. It's from the first day of school till the end of the school year. And we're on a pass, and I don't say the other word because I don't believe in that. We are pass, not yet. So if a student has been working in a class and we come to the end of the year and they've earned a 0.54, we put pass 0.54 on their transcript, and we know that we need to finish up that 0.46 with them the next, whether that's summer school, whether it's night school, or whether they're coming back to us in day school. We just leave it wide open, because that student might start in the fall. If we have a day school student that starts in the fall in our Algebra 1B class, and they need to get both those credits, if it takes them until, let's say, December, and they work really hard and they get through those because they have some previous learning and some previous knowledge from it, we don't make them stop and wait until we start another term. As soon as they're done with that Algebra 1B, they jump right into geometry or Algebra 2, depending upon the student and how they're progressing with their work. We tailor that, but they jump right into the next class, whatever it is that they need to continue making progress to graduation. And I think that's something that's really important, and I hope that more traditional sites look at is the opportunity for students to have that gradebook be open to honor the learning and not the lack of work completion. But again, those are huge conversations and those are deep, and that's a big system change. But I feel like that's the only way that we're truly going to honor all of our students, because when you look at the number of students that we have here, we're looking at about 135-ish right now at our ALC. So we're pretty large. And when you look at the amount of students that did not do well over distance learning, I mean, we could almost triple our numbers, and we don't have the staff or the building to be able to support that, which means we got to do something with our feeder program, I guess you could call it, coming from our high school. And what can we do there to fine tune what we do in our practices that we use there to honor student learning and not necessarily compliance in different system decisions.
Well, and I think you just hit on the $1 million question, right? Like, how do we take some of these things that you're doing at WIllmar ALC, transfer them to other ALCs that may not be functioning that way yet, but even bigger yet, transfer them to our more traditional high schools? That what you've got going on is really a very students first philosophy, that it's about
Correct.
the student and what can we do to put them in a position to graduate. And it's not, there's nowhere did I hear you say that we're giving them grace and we're not holding them accountable. What I heard was
Correct.
we're giving them grace and we're figuring out ways to make them accountable, but in a way that works for them, makes sense for them, and still holds them to that rigorous standard and the proficiency that they're looking for. And I see Todd shaking his head. It looks like he
Yeah.
wants to jump in with
Well,
something.
no, I was just going to say, it just sounds to me like a really individualized plan for every student as they come into your building. So,
Correct. And I just want to clarify, because I'm sure some people that listen to this, they're going to think, yeah, right, we couldn't do that in my building. Like, there's no way, like, he must just have the perfect staff that can do this. Don't get me wrong. My staff, there's some days they come in and they say, are you serious? I got 5 more students, because the amount of time and effort they put into each one of the new students that comes on board, it's extensive to get that ball rolling. But once we can, I always say, once we can break through that initial energy, then we're flowing. Then things are just rolling and we're going one little task at a time, and we're helping that student to succeed. And my staff appreciate the fact that the work that they do put in comes to fruition in the sense of students actually getting what they need, and not what a teacher thinks the teacher needs the student to do, but rather what does the student need from us. And I've been really diving into this Beyond Reform book. It's from Lindsay Unified School District, and they keep talking about how we need to switch our rhetoric from teachers to learning facilitators and our students to learners, so that it is this cyclical sense of we're all learning together. One of us is just facilitating and supporting that growth. So
tell me the name of that book again, Nick.
it's called Beyond Reform: Systemic Shifts Towards Personalized Learning. And it's forwarded by Robert J. Marzano. I know he's not very well known out there in the education world, but if you've heard of the guy, I mean, he's got some pretty good stuff out there.
He's known. I think more people know about him than they know about the Min Ed Soda podcast at this point. So,
maybe for now.
yeah.
Well, we are.
And I'm sorry, Kip. I was just gonna say, you got my question, Nick. I was gonna ask you about some resources, and you beat me to the punch. And real quick, if people want to get in touch with you, Nick, how should they do that?
The best way would be by email, and that's, I'll spell it for you, otherwise it will get butchered. So it's clasemann@willmar.k12.mn.us. So that's CLASEMANN at Willmar, which is WILLMAR.k12.mn.us.
How about Twitter? Are you a Twitter user? Or are you a tweeter?
I am not a tweeter. I am sorry. I never started tweeting, so I am so sorry.
Well, Twitter is Twitter's our whole audience right now, so that's how people get us. But we'll figure out a way to get your stuff out there.
Yeah, we'll pass along messages. Like Kip and I can be your administrative assistants or something like that.
Beautiful. I like it.
All right.
Well, Todd, what were your big takeaways from our half hour here with Nick?
I don't know. I'm going to go back to the whole thing about the importance of the partnership with your local school district and with your surrounding schools. You talked about this before, just about that communication piece is essential. And then really, taking the time to know where students are at and using I called it an individualized learning plan, but figuring out where kids are at. So you're honoring the learning that they've done already, and we're not honoring the time, the 60 hours of butt in a seat. So those are the big things that I took from our conversation. Kip, what about you? Anything else?
the one I go back to over and over, and I've been preaching it from the hilltops for quite a while now, especially as we come through distance learning, is keeping that grade book open, honoring the students for the work that they do, no matter when they do it. We know that students are dealing with different types of life situations and trauma. And so it's just like music to my ears when I hear Nick talk about, we just mark where they're at. And when they come back, we might have to do a little reteaching to get them back to that point, but we're not making them start over. That's not the purpose of the reteaching at that point. The reteaching is just making sure that they're still at that base, and then we go forward. And so for me, every time I talk to Nick, I keep coming back to that talking point of our grade book never closes. That student could literally come back 5-6 years from now with that 0.54 and start up again with just to get the 0.46 that they need. And look at how quickly I did my math. Pretty good.
That's not too bad for a duffer.
That's right. Well, that will wrap up episode number 3. We want to thank Nick Clasemann for joining us today. And so for the doctor, I'm the duffer. Have a great week, and make sure you're passing the word about Min Ed Soda and sharing with others, because we're hoping to line up some more great guests to come. Have a great week.